Hello, my name is Sabine Roser, and I'm a professor of ethics at the Philosophy Department of Delft University of Technology. Today, I will talk about risk, emotions, and ethics. Responsible innovation is especially challenging in the context of risky technologies, such as nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and information technologies. These technologies often give rise to heated emotional public debates. While experts emphasize scientific studies that point out supposedly low risks, the public is often concerned about the impact of such technologies on society. The experts emphasize that the worries of the public are due to a lack of understanding. Policymakers usually respond to this in one of two ways. They ignore the emotions of the public, or they take them as a reason to prohibit or restrict a technology. Let me call these the technocratic pitfall and the populist pitfall, respectively. In both pitfalls, there's no genuine debate about emotions, public concerns, and moral values. Social scientists, psychologists, and philosophers have argued against the technocratic approach for decades. They have pointed out that risk is more than a quantitative scientific notion. Risk is more than the probability of an unwanted effect that we could assess with cost-benefit analysis, as conventional technocratic approaches take it to be. Risk concerns the well-being of humans and involves ethical considerations such as fairness, equity, and autonomy. There's a strong consensus amongst risk scholars that ethical considerations should be included in a risk assessment. Interestingly, as we know from the influential work of the psychologist Paul Slovic, these considerations do figure in the risk perceptions of laypeople. Apparently, the pre-theoretical connotations that people have with risk include ethical considerations that get excluded from the quantitatively oriented approach to risk used by experts. Several risk scholars have argued that laypeople have a different but equally legitimate rationality than experts. However, it has become more and more clear that laypeople's risk perceptions are largely influenced by their emotions. Social scientists are struggling with how to deal with this, as they take emotions to be irrational, which seems to undermine the idea that laypeople might employ an alternative, legitimate rationality concerning risks. However, emotions are not necessarily a threat to rationality. The neuropsychologist Antonio Damasio has famously shown that without emotions, we cannot be practically rational. Indeed, the dominant approach in emotion research in philosophy and psychology these days is a so-called cognitive theory of emotions, according to which emotions are a form or source of cognition and knowledge. As I argue in my philosophical research, these ideas can shed completely new light on the role of emotions in debates about risky technologies. Rather than being opposed to rationality and hence inherently misleading, emotions can then be seen as an invaluable source of wisdom when it comes to assessing the moral acceptability of risk. The emotions of the public can provide insight into reasonable moral considerations that should be taken into account in moral decisions about risky technologies and responsible innovation. Emotions such as sympathy, empathy, and compassion can point out unfair distributions of risks and benefits. Indignation and resentment can point to moral digressions, such as involuntary risk impositions. Experts might feel responsible and worried about the technologies they develop. Fear can point to concern about unforeseen negative consequences of technology. Disgust can point to the ambiguous moral status of, for example, clones and human-animal hybrids. Fear and anxiety can indicate that a technology is a threat to our well-being. Sympathy and empathy can contribute to our understanding of a fair distribution of risks and benefits, and indignation might be an indication of violations of autonomy in cases of risks to which we are exposed against our will. It is often thought that emotions are by definition anti-technology and therefore one-sided, but this is not necessarily the case. Enthusiasm for a technology, for example, can suggest benefits for our well-being. Emotions can draw our attention to important moral considerations that might otherwise be insufficiently addressed. These insights allow for a different way of dealing with risk emotions in public debates by avoiding the technocratic pitfall and the populist pitfall alike. My alternative approach, which I call an emotional deliberation approach to risk, gives the public a genuine voice in which their emotions and concerns actually get heard, listened to, and discussed. It can provide us with ideas on how to communicate about risks in a morally responsible way. Moral emotions can provide for important insights into moral constraints and desirable parameters of responsible innovation. For example, in debates, experts should not only focus on small probabilities of possible risks, but also provide a balanced outlook on positive and negative possible consequences, allowing individuals to make an informed assessment. Involving emotions in deliberation and communication about risks can also contribute to needed changes in behavior. For example, appealing to emotions in campaigns about climate change can increase the currently lacking sense of urgency and at the same time provide for motivation to contribute to environmentally friendly behavior, as emotions are a predominant source of motivation. To wrap up, in the development of risky technologies, emotions and moral concerns have to be taken into account in order to come to a well-grounded ethical assessment and responsible innovation. At the same time, this approach will help overcome the gap between experts and laypeople that occurs over and over again in debates about risky technologies, as the public will feel that the concerns are taken seriously in responsible innovation. Thank you for listening.